When we say that God's presence is never absent, even in the darkest suffering, it is easy for someone far from the pain to nod their head and agree. But for the people living through devastation, for the people surrounded by loss, for the people whose nights are filled with fear instead of rest, that truth must not be spoken lightly. It must be spoken with the weight of compassion and the authority of heaven. Because the miracle is not that everything is perfect. The miracle is that even in the middle of heartbreak, God does not step away. He does not withdraw his hand. He does not turn his face, and he does not pause his love. Pain may be present, but so is God. Suffering may feel overwhelming, but his presence is deeper, stronger, and more real than any destruction on earth. There are moments when the human heart says, if God were here, this would not be happening. But presence is not proven by the absence of storms. Presence is proven by the survival through storms. When people walk through fire and are not consumed, it is not because the flames are gentle. It is because God is standing with them inside the flames. The nights in Gaza may be heavy. The sounds may be terrifying, but in every trembling moment, there is a whisper from heaven that says, I am here. Not weak, not distant, not silent. Here, holding, covering, sustaining. Pain can shout so loudly that it tries to drown out every spiritual truth. It can convince people that silence is abandonment, but silence is not the language of absence. Even when heaven seems still, God is moving. Even when circumstances look frozen, God is working behind the scenes. People often assume God's presence must feel comfortable, but sometimes his presence is the strength that keeps you standing when you should have fallen. It is the breath that comes in your chest when anxiety tries to steal it. It is the moment when a child cries out and somehow finds comfort. Even in chaos, presence does not always feel like ease. It feels like endurance. In suffering, the greatest lie the enemy tries to plant is isolation, the feeling that no one sees, no one cares, no one hears. But the truth contradicts that lay entirely. God is closest to the brokenhearted, not the comfortable. His presence leans into pain, not away from it. He steps into the places where humans cannot go. He steps into a home damaged by conflict and fills it with unexplained inner strength. He steps into a family grieving loss and wraps them in a peace that does not come from this world. His presence becomes the invisible shield that keeps despair from swallowing the soul. There is a spiritual law where pain increases, grace increases more. The world knows how to send sympathy, but God sends presence. The world may forget, but God engraves every cry onto his heart. Even in moments that look hopeless, his presence is silently working on the inside of people, building resilience, building courage, building faith that does not collapse under pressure. A person can lose buildings, but God protects their spirit. A person can lose stability, but God protects their purpose. A person can lose a sense of control, but God preserves their destiny. Suffering has a way of clouding the mind, making it difficult to recognize divine activity. But God does some of his strongest work in the darkest places. Darkness does not intimidate him. It only reveals his light more clearly. If the sun only shone in daylight, no one would notice its power. But when the night comes, the smallest spark becomes impossible to ignore. In the same way, God's presence in suffering becomes a beacon that the human mind cannot explain, but the human heart cannot deny. It is that quiet courage that rises inside someone who should be too exhausted to stand. It is that hope that refuses to die even after everything else has been shaken. Many people misunderstand suffering as punishment, but suffering is not the absence of God. It is often the soil where God's greatest miracles begin to form. The story is not finished just because tragedy has occurred. The presence of suffering does not cancel the presence of God. It activates it. Even when people walk through valleys they never asked for, God walks with them step by step. When they have no strength, he lends them his. When they have no words, he listens to the language of their tears. He is present in ways that human eyes cannot see, but human spirits can feel. Presence is not just physical. It is spiritual, emotional, and eternal. There are testimonies that have not yet been written in Gaza, testimonies of how people survive through things no human should survive. When they tell the story in the future, they will say, what should have been destroyed, but somehow we endured. That endurance is not human. It is divine. God's presence has been the barrier, the backbone, the breath, the shelter in the storm. Even when the storm did not stop, his presence kept the people from being swept away. His presence is not only protective, it is prophetic. It does not just cover today, it speaks to tomorrow. The same God who is standing with Gaza in pain is the God who will stand with Gaza in restoration. The same presence that keeps them alive today will guide them into healing, rebuilding, and renewal. Presence is the seed of future transformation. God never remains where there is no future. If he is present, it means the story will not end here. People may feel forgotten by governments, by leaders, or by the world, but they are not forgotten by God. His presence is the ultimate declaration of worth. If he remains, then hope remains. If he stays, then destiny is still intact. If he has not left, then the future is still open. And he has not left, he is closer than breath, nearer than fear, deeper than grief. Even in the darkest suffering, he is there, not watching, working, not observing, intervening, not distant, deeply, intimately present. His presence is not a feeling, it is a reality, and that reality is stronger than any suffering on earth. When destruction surrounds a people, the human mind often assumes that destiny has been canceled. When buildings fall, when streets crack, when homes turn to dust, the heart is tempted to believe that the future has collapsed with them. But destiny is not built on concrete, it is built on divine purpose. And divine purpose does not break just because the world breaks. What has been placed by heaven cannot be erased by earth. The circumstances may look overwhelming, but destiny is not intimidated by destruction. It lives above it, it rises through it, it survives beyond it. Destiny is not fragile, it is eternal. It is not shaped by war, it is shaped by God. People often confuse their environment with their assignment. They think that if life around them is crumbling, it must mean that their purpose is crumbling too. But purpose does not depend on peaceful surroundings. Some of the strongest purposes ever birthed were born in the middle of chaos. When everything external is shaking, purpose becomes the anchor that keeps the soul from drifting. The destruction in Gaza may look like a full stop, but in the language of heaven, it is not a period. It is a comma. The sentence of destiny continues. The writing of God does not stop when the world writes tragedy. He continues the story with restoration. Destiny is a spiritual blueprint, not a physical building. Buildings can be rebuilt. Destiny does not need rebuilding because it is never destroyed. It lives within the person, not around them. It is planted in the heart, not the soil. It is carried by faith, not by fortune. When people lose everything external, they still carry everything internal. That truth alone is the reason why destruction cannot cancel destiny. The essence of who they are cannot be burned, bombed, or broken. Purpose is protected by the Creator himself. Sometimes destruction becomes the very environment where destiny reveals its true strength. People do not know how powerful they are until life tries to break them. And even then, the spirit refuses to collapse. There is a supernatural resilience inside every person that awakens when everything familiar is taken away. This resilience is a sign that destiny is still alive. It is the whisper inside that says, this is not the end. It is the quiet fire inside that says, there is more after this. It is the divine knowing that the story is still unfolding even when tragedy tries to close the book. Every great destiny encounters seasons where everything seems impossible. That is not the sign of the end. It is the preparation for the next level. When the ground is cleared by destruction, it becomes ready for rebuilding. When walls fall, new foundations can be laid. When the old is gone, the new can rise. Destiny thrives in divine rebuilding. The destruction may have knocked down structures, but it also removed limitations. The future that will be built can be stronger than what stood before. Destiny does not fear starting again. It is empowered by it. The human spirit is often unaware of its own capacity until struggle forces its strength forward. Gaza carries a destiny that did not begin with conflict and will not end with conflict. There are children growing up there today who will carry wisdom, compassion, creativity, and leadership shaped by their environment, but not limited by it. There are families who will rebuild with hands that tremble yet carry determination stronger than any weapon. There are communities who will rise from sorrow with unity that cannot be explained by human logic. That is destiny at work. It does not fade in destruction. It intensifies. Destruction is loud, but destiny speaks louder. One breaks the world around people, the other builds the world within them. One tears down walls, the other raises hope. One tries to silence identity, the other amplifies calling, and no matter how powerful destruction seems, it cannot overpower what God has placed inside his people. Destiny is backed by divine authority, not human approval. It is written in eternal ink, not temporary conditions. History shows that some of the greatest transformations in nations and communities began after seasons of severe loss. Not because destruction is good, but because God can bring good out of anything. He rebuilds in ways that surpass human understanding. When humanity believes everything is over, heaven sees it as a moment to begin something new. Destruction becomes the soil where destiny's seeds can sprout. It becomes the place where miracles take root. It becomes the environment where a new chapter begins with strength that did not exist before. People often look at their surroundings and assume their destiny is tied to what they see. But destiny is tied to what God has spoken, and what he has spoken cannot be canceled. Gaza may be experiencing unimaginable pain, but destiny remains intact. The children born today are not born into hopelessness. They are born into a chapter of transformation. The parents struggling today are not failing. They are carrying courage that will shape generations. The elders sorrowing today are not forgotten. They are the keepers of wisdom that will guide the future. The road of destiny rarely goes straight. It goes through valleys, through fires, through storms. But every valley is walked with divine guidance. Every fire is faced with divine protection, and every storm is endured with divine strength. Destiny is not a smooth path, it is a victorious one, and Gaza will not be the exception. The destruction today is not the definition of tomorrow. The suffering now is not the symbol of forever. The tears today are not the prophecy of the future. The presence of pain does not erase the promise of purpose. There will come a day when the destruction seen today becomes the testimony told tomorrow. There will come a day when children raise their voices not in fear, but in strength, remembering how they survived. There will come a day when families walk through streets rebuilt with dignity. There will come a day when peace does not feel like a dream, but a reality. These days are part of destiny's unfolding. They are not distant, they are developing. Destiny is the assurance that destruction is temporary. Purpose is the guarantee that pain is not final. And when God rebuilds, he does not rebuild the same. He rebuilds stronger, deeper, more blessed, and more beautiful. The future of Gaza is not buried under rubble. It is rising from it. And that rise will be undeniable. Pain has a language that is louder than words, heavier than silence, and deeper than understanding. When a community goes through suffering, the mind instantly searches for meaning, for explanations, for signs of where God is in the middle of it all. The human heart often interprets pain as divine distance. It whispers, if God was here, this would not have happened. But the truth is the complete opposite. Pain is not a sign of abandonment. It is a doorway to divine intervention. Suffering does not signal that heaven has turned away. It signals that heaven is preparing to step in. Pain is not evidence that God has left. It is often evidence that God is getting ready to reveal what only pain can prepare a person to receive. Every great transformation in the human spirit begins in a moment of deep brokenness. Not because brokenness is good in itself, but because brokenness opens places in the heart that comfort never touches. When everything is comfortable, people rarely look upward. When life is peaceful, people rarely search for deeper meaning. But when everything shakes, when life becomes unbearable, when sorrow becomes too heavy for one soul to carry, humanity begins to cry out for strength beyond its own. That cry is not an echo into emptiness. It is a call that heaven hears immediately. Pain is the place where God meets humanity with the kind of closeness that cannot be felt in ease. A wounded heart is not a weak heart. It is an open heart. Pain cracks the shell that people use to protect themselves from vulnerability, and through that crack, light enters. It is in the hardest moments that people discover that God is not just a distant ruler or a faraway presence. He becomes personal. He becomes intimate. He becomes the comfort that holds the heart together when it is breaking apart. Pain is where people stop depending on their strength and begin leaning into a strength that does not run out. It opens a spiritual doorway where people can finally see that the help they need cannot come from the world. It must come from heaven. There are countless moments in life when suffering does not look like divine preparation. It looks like chaos. It looks like loss. It looks like defeat. But the greatest moves of God are often hidden inside moments that look the most hopeless. When darkness feels overwhelming, that's exactly when the light is preparing to break through. When people say, there is nothing left, that is when God says, now I can begin. Pain removes illusions. It strips away distractions. It forces people to see what truly matters, and in that clarity, God begins his work. Pain is a spiritual alarm clock. It awakens the soul. It wakes up purpose, identity, resilience, and faith. Sometimes comfort keeps these things asleep, but suffering shakes them awake. There are strengths people never discover until hardship forces them to. There are depths of courage that remain hidden until circumstances demand them. There are levels of faith people do not think they have until life pushes them to the edge. Pain becomes the furnace where resilience is formed and where divine intervention becomes undeniable. What people survive reveals what God sustains. In many situations, pain becomes the place where the impossible begins to take shape. Human effort has limits, but divine intervention has none. When people reach the end of their ability, they step into the beginning of God's power. When they reach the end of their hope, they step into the beginning of God's promise. When they reach the end of their strength, they step into the beginning of God's supernatural ability. Pain is not the end of a story. It is the doorway through which God enters to rewrite the rest of it. There are families in Gaza who are living through unimaginable sorrow, yet somehow they wake up each day and continue. That continuation is not human. It is divine intervention disguised as daily strength. There are mothers who hold their children close, not knowing what tomorrow brings, yet love keeps flowing from them like a river that never dries. That love is divine intervention. There are fathers who continue to stand even though their hearts are shattered, showing courage that makes no logical sense. That courage is divine intervention. There are children who smile even in the ruins, holding on to innocence in a world that tries to steal it. That hope is divine intervention. Pain has opened a doorway where God's strength, his comfort, and his presence keep moving through the people in ways they may not recognize, but they can feel. Divine intervention does not always appear as a sudden miracle. Sometimes it appears as the strength to endure another day. Sometimes it shows up as the ability to breathe through trauma. Sometimes it shows up as a moment of peace in the middle of chaos. Sometimes it shows up in strangers helping strangers, families comforting families, and communities staying united when everything around them tries to tear them apart. These are not small moments. These are divine fingerprints. Pain has opened the doorway, and God is walking through it in countless invisible ways. Suffering may try to convince people that they are abandoned, but God moves closest to those who suffer. He does not stand on the mountain while people struggle in the valley. He walks with them through the valley. He does not remain distant while they are wounded. He binds their wounds. He does not leave them to grieve alone. He carries their sorrow with them. Pain is the place where divine compassion becomes more real than ever before. It reveals that God is not a spectator of suffering. He is a participant in the healing that follows it. There is a moment in every painful season when the human heart finally realizes that the suffering did not break them. It shaped them. It strengthened them. It deepened them. It carved out space inside them for miracles they never imagined. Pain becomes the chisel that shapes destiny. It becomes the fire that shapes character. It becomes the storm that reveals the anchor. And the longer a people endure, the clearer it becomes that they were never enduring alone. For Gaza, every tear is seen. Every cry is heard. Every broken moment is sacred in the eyes of heaven. And through that pain, divine intervention is already forming, already working, already preparing to reveal itself in ways the world can't deny. Pain may be present, but abandonment is not. Pain may be loud, but God is louder. And through every wound, He is working, healing, guiding, strengthening, and protecting. Pain is not the sign that God has left. It is the doorway heaven uses to enter. Hope is not a soft emotion, nor is it a fragile feeling that disappears when life gets heavy. Hope is a spiritual weapon. It is a force, a power, a shield, a fire that refuses to die even when everything around it burns. Hope is the whisper inside the soul that says, something greater is coming, even when the world insists nothing will ever change, and when people feel powerless, when they feel too tired to fight, too broken to stand, too overwhelmed to continue, hope steps forward and fights for them. Hope becomes the warrior when human strength cannot. Hope becomes the voice when sorrow silences every other sound. Hope becomes the foundation when the ground beneath their feet gives way. The world often misunderstands hope as a weak response to suffering. But hope is not weakness. Hope is warfare. It is the refusal to surrender to darkness. It is the refusal to believe that the current pain is the final chapter. It is the refusal to let despair crown itself king. When circumstances strip people of control, when systems fail them, when the environment crushes them, hope gives them access to a strength that does not come from human hands. Hope is the bridge between present suffering and future restoration. It is the inner strength that keeps the heart alive when it feels like everything else is dying. Hope is not built on circumstances. It is built on promises. Circumstances change. Promises endure. Circumstances shake. Promises stand. Circumstances are temporary. Promises are eternal. When people anchor their hope in what heaven has spoken rather than what the world shows, they tap into a power that cannot be destroyed. This is why hope is so threatening to darkness, because darkness cannot control a heart that still believes. Despair controls, fear controls, anger controls, but hope liberates. Hope unlocks the spirit. Hope gives strength that does not make sense. Hope declares that the story is still unfolding, no matter how bleak the present may look. There are moments in life when people feel powerless, especially in places where suffering has become a daily reality. But powerlessness is not the same as hopelessness. Powerlessness is the state of not knowing what to do. Hopelessness is the state of believing nothing can be done. Those two things are worlds apart. People may feel powerless for a moment, but as long as hope remains alive, they are never hopeless. Hope is the spark that lights the path forward when everything else seems lost. It is the inner compass that points them toward a future they cannot yet see. Hope is a spiritual rebellion. It refuses to bow to what the eyes witness. It looks beyond the rubble, beyond the sorrow, beyond the pain, and sees a promise that cannot be erased. When people say, there is no way, hope quietly answers, watch what God will do. When people say, this is impossible, hope reminds them that impossibility is the stage where miracles begin. When people say, it's over, hope speaks up and says, it is not over until heaven declares it finished. Hope is not blind optimism. It is divine understanding. It knows that the unseen realm is more powerful than the seen one. In Gaza, hope is not just a thought. It is a lifeline. It is the invisible power keeping families together. It is the reason parents hold onto their children with fierce love. It is the reason communities continue to stand even when everything around them has fallen. It is the reason young people dream of a tomorrow that looks different from today. Hope becomes the quiet courage that flows through a mother feeding her children despite everything pressing against her. Hope becomes the strength in a father's voice when he tells his family, we will make it through this. Hope becomes the light in a child's eyes when they laugh, even in the hardest times. These are not small moments. These are miracles of hope at work. Hope does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it stands silently in the corner of a broken room, holding the heart together when nothing else can. Sometimes it is the breath someone takes after crying until they cannot cry anymore. Sometimes it is the way two neighbors support each other without speaking a word. Hope is often quiet, but its quietness does not mean weakness. Some of the most powerful battles happen in silence. Some of the strongest victories happen inside a heart that refuses to collapse. Even when people feel powerless, heaven is never powerless. This is the secret hope understands. When humans cannot intervene, God can. When humans cannot fix, God can restore. When humans cannot protect, God can cover. Hope keeps the connection alive between the human heart and divine strength. It is the line that remains unbroken when everything else snaps. Hope says, you are not alone, even when the world seems empty. Hope says, God is moving, even when nothing appears to change. Hope says, the story is not finished, even when the pages are stained with tears. There are people who have survived things that should have destroyed them, not because they were stronger, not because they were smarter, not because they were more capable, but because hope refused to let them quit. Hope kept them breathing. Hope kept them believing. Hope kept them alive. Hope can carry a person further than fear ever will. Fear paralyzes, but hope mobilizes. Fear shrinks, but hope expands. Fear destroys, but hope rebuilds. Hope is the gift heaven gives to those who suffer. It is the divine reminder that the future is still open, that the promises still stand, that the stories is still alive. When people feel powerless, that is often the moment when heaven does its greatest work. Because powerlessness removes the illusion of control and allows divine strength to step forward. In that moment, hope becomes the connection point between human weakness and heavenly power. Hope is the greatest resistance against despair. It is the most powerful declaration against darkness. It is the loudest message heaven speaks into wounded hearts. And as long as hope remains, even the smallest spark, even the quietest whisper, even the faintest breath, the future cannot be defeated. Hope is stronger than war, stronger than fear, stronger than sorrow, stronger than anything that tries to crush the human spirit. And for every person, every family, every heart in Gaza, hope is not a distant concept. It is alive. It is working. It is fighting for them. Even when they feel powerless, heaven is moving. Even when they feel weary, hope is rising. Even when they feel forgotten, the future is being written. Hope is not leaving. Hope is not dying. Hope is standing right beside them, whispering, you will rise again. There comes a moment in every journey of pain, every season of struggle, every chapter soaked in tears, when a person begins to believe the lie that what they are going through is meaningless, that their suffering is wasted, that nothing good could possibly rise out of this, that the ashes are too heavy, the wounds too deep, the story too shattered. And yet, if there is one truth that the human heart must never let go of, it is the truth that there is no suffering without divine purpose. There is no pain outside the circle of God's awareness. There is no loss unseen, no cry unheard, no struggle ignored. When life is at its hardest, that is often when destiny is being carved most deeply. Not because pain is good, not because hardship is noble in itself, but because what is forged in fire carries a strength that cannot be created any other way. Purpose is not born on mountaintops. Purpose grows in valleys. Purpose rises out of discomfort, pressure, and moments when everything seems to fall apart. And even in a land like Gaza, where devastation has touched every home, every street, every soul, there is still purpose unfolding. It may not look like it now. It may not feel like it in the middle of grief. But every season of tragedy carries seeds that will bloom in the future. Seeds of resilience, seeds of unity, seeds of spiritual awakening, seeds of a new identity, forged not by defeat, but by endurance. The world sees ruins, but God sees foundations. The world sees loss, but heaven sees rebirth. The world sees hopelessness, but the one who created every soul sees potential rising from broken ground. Purpose is not always understood in the present. Sometimes the weight of what people go through blinds them to what is being shaped within them. But purpose is not measured by comfort. Purpose is measured by transformation, by what pain turns a person into, by what struggle equips them for, by what adversity prepares them to carry. When everything around you is stripped away, only the essential parts of your character remain, and that is where strength lives. That is where destiny lives. That is where spiritual power is awakened. Gaza may feel pressed, crushed, overwhelmed, but purpose is being refined in the fire of adversity. Even when hope feels faint, meaning is being molded into the hearts of survivors. People who have walked through this level of suffering carry a depth of compassion, a depth of faith, a depth of perseverance that cannot be taught in comfort. Purpose also reveals itself in how people respond to what they go through. Pain can make a person bitter or it can make them braver. Hardship can break people, or it can bend them into a new version of themselves, stronger, wiser, more grounded. It is not the suffering that defines destiny. It is the response. It is the decision to rise again even when rising seems impossible. It is the decision to hold on to faith even when faith feels like the last thread left. It is the decision to tell yourself, this will not be the end of my story. There will be a new chapter. There will be a new sunrise. There will be a new beginning. That decision, that internal shift, is where purpose begins to take shape. Even the greatest destinies in human history were birthed in the most difficult circumstances. The darkest nights often precede the brightest dawns. What looks like destruction can actually become the soil for transformation. When people lose everything except their faith, they discover that faith is enough to rebuild anything. Purpose turns pain into fuel. It turns loss into wisdom. It turns wounds into testimonies that strengthen generations to come. What Gaza is experiencing is not the end. It is a place of birthing. The hardest seasons often precede the greatest miracles. And even though the world may overlook this region, heaven is attentive. Even though powers may dismiss the cries, God does not. Even though injustice may roar loudly, divine purpose speaks louder, silently shaping, silently preparing, silently strengthening the hearts of those who refuse to give up. Purpose also extends beyond the individual. The suffering of one community often awakens the conscience of the world. What people endure becomes a call to compassion for others. Their courage becomes an inspiration to millions. Their survival becomes a testimony that shakes nations out of complacency. Gaza's pain is prompting hearts around the world to reevaluate what matters, to stand for justice, to speak for the oppressed, to remember the humanity of people they have never met. This is purpose in motion, purpose that stretches beyond borders, beyond cultures, beyond divisions. Sometimes one nation's suffering becomes the seed that shifts global awareness. And although this does not justify the pain, it reminds us that suffering never happens in isolation. It impacts the world, reshapes perspectives, and awakens spiritual responsibility in hearts that were previously asleep. Another layer of purpose is identity. People who walk through unimaginable challenges often discover who they truly are. They find their voice. They find their inner strength. They find what they stand for. Gaza is not just a location. It is a people whose identity is being refined in the fire. Their endurance is becoming their legacy. Their courage is becoming their story. Their unwavering spirit is becoming their testimony. The world may try to define them by conflict, but heaven defines them by resilience. Purpose is restoring dignity in the middle of loss. It is igniting hope in the middle of despair. It is reminding every soul that no battle lasts forever and no suffering is without meaning. And finally, purpose is always connected to restoration. What is lost can be rebuilt. What is broken can be healed. What is stolen can be returned in greater measure. There is no wound too deep for God to restore. There is no devastation too final for God to reverse. Purpose ensures that the story does not end in tragedy. It ensures that at the end of the suffering, there will be rebuilding. There will be revival. There will be renewal. Gaza's future will not be defined by destruction, but by the glory of what rises after it. And though no one can yet see the full picture, heaven is already writing it.